My name is Claire, and I'm 29 years old. If you've ever been the overlooked child, the one your parents assume will be fine, while they pour all their attention and resources into someone else, then you'll understand the bitterness that's about to spill out of me. Because that's who I was. Always the one expected to understand, to sacrifice, to forgive. My younger sister Mia was the star. She was delicate, charming, quick with a smile that melted hearts. My parents used to say, "Mia just needs a little extra. You're stronger, Claire. You can manage on your own." Those words followed me like a curse. And for years, I accepted it. I worked jobs while I studied, bought my own clothes, even helped with household bills when I still lived at home. And later, without them even asking, I took on their mortgage. They didn't know it, but I had quietly arranged automatic payments from my business account to theirs. Every month, thousands disappeared from my hard work straight into keeping their roof solid above their heads. They thought they were managing. They thought Dad's job and Mom's careful budgeting was enough. They had no clue their invisible daughter was the one holding the foundation steady. And maybe I would have kept it that way forever, if not for my 29th birthday. I'd been planning something small but meaningful. A dinner, just close family, nothing extravagant. I wanted one night. Just one night where maybe, for once, I would feel seen. The week before, I called Mom. "Can you and Dad come for dinner Saturday? I'll make lasagna, your favorite. Maybe we can invite Mia too. Just us." Her silence stretched too long. I heard Mia's laughter in the background. Then Mom sighed. "Oh, honey, about that. Mia has this important date that night. With Kevin, from that wealthy family. We really don't want her to miss it. It could be her chance to, well, you understand." You understand. Two words that tasted like ash. So my birthday, my last one before 30, was canceled. Not postponed. Not celebrated early. Just brushed aside. Because Mia had a date. That Saturday, I bought myself a cake from the bakery down the street. Vanilla with strawberry filling. I lit the candles alone in my apartment. The flame flickered across the cheap paper plates I'd set out for no one but me. And when I blew out the candles, I didn't wish for love or success or family. I wished for courage. The courage to stop being invisible. That night, after I sliced the cake, I pulled out my laptop. Opened the banking portal. Logged into the account where I'd linked their mortgage. The green active button blinked at me cheerfully, like it had every month for 3 years. My finger hovered over cancel automatic payment. I thought of every sacrifice. The nights I skipped dinners to cover their bills. The freelance projects I took at 3 a.m. The vacations I never had. The clothes I wore until the seams gave out. All while Mia flaunted designer purses and weekend getaways. All while Mom and Dad clapped for her every accomplishment and barely nodded at mine. I clicked. The green light vanished. Just like that, the mortgage was theirs again. I leaned back, a strange calm flooding through me. For the first time in years, I wasn't holding them up. I wasn't bending myself backward to make their world easier. I was free. The storm wouldn't hit right away. It never does. But I knew it was coming. And when it came, they would have no idea who unleashed it. The next morning, I walked into Sunday brunch at my parents' house. Mia was there, glowing, chattering about her date. "He drives a Mercedes, Claire. A real one, not a lease. He even ordered for me, like in the movies." Mom and Dad listened with stars in their eyes. Dad actually said, "You're so lucky, Mia. Maybe this could turn into something serious. A man like that could change your life." I sipped my coffee, bitter like their favoritism. Not one word about my birthday. Not one question about my life. I smiled. "Sounds great, Mia. I hope it works out." Inside, I laughed. Because soon, very soon, they'd stop seeing me as this strong one who can manage. They'd see what happens when the invisible daughter stops carrying the weight. Before I continue, let me ask you, have you ever been treated like the background character in your own family story? Pushed aside, told to understand, to wait, to sacrifice? If you have, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and share your own story. I want to know, have you ever reached the point where enough was enough? And hey, don't forget to subscribe because what came next? It shook my family more than anything they ever imagined. 3 weeks later, the calls started. Mom's voice was tight. Claire, did you happen to change something with the mortgage? The bank sent a notice. We're behind. Behind. The word made me want to dance. I played dumb. Oh, that's strange. Maybe you should call the bank. 2 more weeks. Another call. Dad this time, his voice sharp with panic. Claire, the mortgage hasn't been paid. The bank says it's been canceled. Do you know anything about this? I hesitated just long enough to sting. Dad, I don't know what to tell you. Maybe you should check your accounts more carefully. The silence that followed was delicious. Because for the first time in my life, they were realizing I wasn't their safety net. And that was just the beginning. The storm didn't take long to build. Within a month, their perfect suburban calm cracked. Letters piled on the kitchen counter, pink, red, and stamped with words like urgent and final notice. I stopped by one evening, invited under the guise of family dinner. But really, it was an ambush. Dad's jaw was tight, his voice clipped. Claire, the mortgage is overdue. The payments were canceled from the account. The bank says it was done deliberately. Do you know anything about this? Mia, sitting pretty at the table with her manicured nails tapping against her wine glass, smirked. Probably some mistake. Claire isn't exactly detail-oriented, right? Mom winced. Don't say that, Mia. Then turned her hopeful eyes to me. Claire, sweetie, if you did something by accident, just tell us. We can fix it together. Accident. Together. I sliced a piece of roast beef, chewed slowly, and swallowed before answering. Maybe the universe is trying to tell you something. Maybe it's time you all handle things on your own. The room froze. Dad slammed his fork down. You're saying you did this? I smiled. I'm saying, I'm not your safety net anymore. Mia laughed outright. Safety net? Oh, please. You've barely kept yourself afloat for years, Claire. Don't exaggerate. I set my fork down, leaned back in my chair, and studied her perfect little smirk. Really? Then I guess the bank just magically thought you were behind on payments. My mistake. Her smirk faltered. Mom's eyes darted between us, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her water glass. Claire, we've always done everything for you. How could you? I cut her off.
No, Mom.
You've always done everything for Mia. For me, you've done the bare minimum because you assumed I didn't need more. Well, now you'll see what happens when the strong one stops carrying everyone else. The silence that followed was the sweetest music I'd ever heard. 2 weeks later, foreclosure notices arrived. I didn't even have to ask. Mom called me crying at midnight. They're threatening to take the house, Claire. Do something, please. We raised you. We gave you everything. I laughed, the sound sharp in the dark. Everything? You canceled my birthday for Mia's date. Do you remember that, Mom? Or was that just another thing you brushed aside? Her sobs filled the line. That was one night. One mistake. One night too many. I whispered and hung up. Meanwhile, Mia strutted around like nothing was wrong. She still posted her luxury brunches on Instagram, still bragged about her dates with Kevin. But cracks were forming. Kevin, apparently, wasn't so thrilled to be dating someone whose family home was collapsing under debt. He pulled back, suddenly too busy to see her. And Mia, Princess Mia, started panicking. One Sunday, she showed up at my apartment uninvited. Her mascara was smeared, her voice shaking. Claire, you have to help. The house, it's embarrassing. People are talking. Kevin won't even text me back. Please, just pay it. You can figure something out, right? You're the responsible one. Responsible one. Those words, once a chain, now tasted like freedom. I stood there, arms crossed.
No, Mia.
I'm done. If you want your life to look picture perfect, you figure it out. She looked at me like I'd stabbed her. You're heartless. I smiled.
No.
I'm finally heart-free. And I shut the door. The weeks that followed were chaos. Dad's temper exploded more often. Mom's voice turned brittle. Mia sulked, snapped, cried. And all the while, the foreclosure clock ticked louder. By month 3, reality slammed down. The house, our family home, was officially on the bank's auction list. The night before the auction, Dad called me. His voice was stripped of pride, of authority. It was the voice of a man drowning. "Claire," he whispered.
Please.
"Just please. If you ever loved us, help us now." I stared out my window, the city lights reflecting in my glass. For years, I'd loved them so much I'd bled myself dry to keep them safe. But love doesn't mean endless sacrifice. "I do love you, Dad," I said softly. "That's why I'm letting you finally face reality. Maybe this way, you'll understand what you did to me." And then I hung up. The next morning, the auction began. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. I knew exactly how it would end. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined, was that I wasn't just canceling payments. I was waiting, watching. And when the house hit the auction floor, when the highest bid was called, it was mine. I bought the house out from under them. And that was only the beginning of my revenge. When I signed the papers for the house, the agent looked at me with raised eyebrows. "Family place?" he asked. I smirked. "Something like that." I didn't explain that I'd grown up in those walls, that I'd been laughed at and belittled in that living room, that every corner echoed with my sister's laughter while my milestones were ignored. No, I didn't explain anything. Some things feel better when they remain unspoken. That night, I drove past the house. It still looked the same. White shutters, trimmed hedges, the porch swing Dad had built years ago. But the energy was different. A foreclosure notice still flapped on the door, bright red against the pale paint. Inside, my parents and Mia were packing in chaos. Through the open curtains, I could see boxes stacked high, my mother pacing like a ghost, Dad slamming drawers, Mia flinging clothes onto her bed in a tantrum. I parked across the street and just watched. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one holding them together. I wasn't the one smoothing the edges, taking the blame, making things work. I was the one letting them unravel. And I felt powerful. The call came 2 days later. Mom's voice, hollow and broken. "Claire, we lost the house. We don't know what to do. Please, can you lend us something? Just until we find a place." I leaned back in my chair, twirling a pen between my fingers. "Where are you staying now?" "A motel," she whispered. It's not good. Your father, he's so angry." Mia won't stop crying. I smiled to myself. Well, maybe Mia should have canceled her date and celebrated my birthday that night. Then things would have been different. Mom gasped. "You can't still be holding on to that. That was years ago." "Exactly," I said coldly. "Years of favoritism. Years of making me second choice. You made your bed. Now you can lie in it, motel sheets and all." I hung up. 2 weeks later, Mia showed up at my door again. This time, no makeup. No heels. Just sweatpants and desperation. "Claire, I know you're mad. I know we've been awful to you. But please, we're family. We're supposed to stick together. Don't let Mom and Dad lose everything. Don't let me," her voice cracked, "don't let me lose my life." I studied her, really studied her. For years, she'd been untouchable. The princess. The favorite. The one who could do no wrong. And now, she was crumbling. "Funny," I said softly, "you never thought about my life when you were laughing at me. When you took everything, even my birthday. Why should I care now?" Tears streaked her face. Because you're better than me." I tilted my head.
No, Mia.
"I'm just done being worse." And I closed the door in her face. Owning the house gave me leverage I never imagined. Suddenly, I wasn't the forgotten middle child anymore. I was the landlord. I could have rented it out.
Could have sold it. But no.
I had bigger plans. I waited until the family was at their lowest, until the motel money ran out, until the shame sank into their bones. And then I called them. "Hi, Mom," I said sweetly. "I have a solution. You can move back into the house." Her gasp was audible. "Really? Oh, Claire, thank you. Thank you. We'll do anything." "Anything?" I repeated, savoring the word. "Yes," she breathed. We'll pay rent, we'll keep it clean, whatever you want. I smiled.
Good.
Because you're not moving back as owners. You're moving back as tenants. And I'll be your landlord. Silence. Heavy.
Stunned.
Then Dad's voice in the background, sharp with disbelief. She can't be serious. But I was. Dead serious. The day they moved back in was delicious. I stood on the porch, arms folded, watching them carry boxes inside. Mia wouldn't meet my eyes. Dad glared, his pride in tatters. Mom fussed, trying to act like this was normal. Here are the rules, I said, handing them a printed list. Rent's due on the 1st. No parties. No disrespect. And Mia, I locked eyes with her. You clean the kitchen. Every day. Her mouth fell open.
What?
I've never. Then start learning, I said flatly. Consider it part of your rent. She sputtered, but Mom shushed her. Dad muttered under his breath. And I walked through my childhood home like I finally owned it because I did. The weeks that followed were pure justice. Mia scrubbing dishes, scowling at me. Dad fixing the leaky faucet because the landlord said so. Mom tiptoeing around me, terrified I'd kick them out. For the first time, I was in control. And it felt incredible. But the story didn't end there. Oh no. Because revenge is best when it evolves. And I was just getting started. When the first rent check from my parents arrived in my account, it felt like a small victory. Paper and numbers, sure, but it was also a shift in the ledger of power in our family. For years the ledger had shown one thing: my labor, my money, my sacrifices. Now the columns were changing. They paid in cash at first, embarrassed and fumbling. Mom insisted she didn't want a bank transfer because it felt wrong, but Dad grumbled and handed me an envelope. I signed a receipt like a professional, keeping my face neutral while my insides hummed with a quiet satisfaction. The house was the same, its familiar squeaks and sun-faded curtains, but the dynamic had altered in ways I was only beginning to enjoy. It didn't take long for small rebellions to start. Mia, used to being waited on, began to complain about chores. "This is humiliating," she'd say, folding laundry with dramatic slowness. "I never expected to." And then catch herself, eyes darting to me as if I might snap. I didn't snap.
I didn't need to.
A raised eyebrow and the words "rent is due on the 1st" did more than any tantrum could. Neighbors started noticing changes too. The Thompson family next door, who for years had waved at Dad and commented to anyone who'd listen that Mia is such a sweet girl, suddenly took me more seriously. I would see Mr. Thompson at the mailbox, polite but not condescending, nodding like an equal. Those small shifts felt like ripples across a pond that had long been stagnant. Meanwhile, I spent evenings in the office I'd carved out for myself in the attic of the house, my business hub, the place where I'd once balanced ledgers until my eyes stung. I started taking better clients, larger projects. The business that had been a side hustle became a real company, an LLC, contracts, employees, the whole frightening, thrilling thing. I hired someone to help with social media and bookkeeping, and suddenly my head wasn't just inside spreadsheets. It was in meetings and strategy sessions and phone calls at odd hours. Life filled up with work that mattered, work where my name at the top of an email meant something. Dad tried a little. Sometimes he'd show up with coffee and say, "How's the company, Claire?" And I'd answer without malice, explaining a client pitch or a scheduling snafu. In those moments, there was a sliver of the father I'd loved, a man curious about his daughter's life. But then Evelyn's old rules would creep back in. Dad would cluck and say, "Make sure you don't forget family obligations," and the old equilibrium would try to reassert itself. I learned to ignore the nudge. My calendar wasn't for their convenience anymore. Mia, however, kept testing the edges. One night she brought over a boyfriend to the house, someone she said was a great guy, a good match for me. He sat stiffly on my couch while Mia explained to her friends that she was living at her sister's house, temporarily. I could see the awkwardness in his face, the way he glanced at the framed family photos with my little headshot tucked in the corner as though trying to find a clue. Later, when she stormed into my office upstairs, voice sharp, I didn't rise to argue. She slammed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. "You're ruining things," she said. "Dad can't stand this. You're making him miserable." I pressed my fingers to the keyboard and kept typing. "I'm making sure we survive," I said, "and that we don't take your behavior for granted." "You don't get to be the judge here," she snapped. "You're not the one who lost everything. Did you think losing everything would give you perspective?" I asked. "Because it did, Mia." "It gave you panic." She looked away then, something brittle in her eyes. For the first time, I saw fragility beneath the entitlement. It didn't make me soften. As landlord, I instituted practical rules: repairs scheduled in advance, utilities divided fairly, and a maintenance log. I arranged a cleaning rota and stuck to it. I created a simple spreadsheet to track shared expenses on the household account. "We all chip in," I told them as plainly as I could. No exceptions. They grumbled. They schemed. But they followed. After all, the alternative was wandering again. Another motel, another humiliation. Survival has a way of breaking even the proudest hearts. Then came a turn I hadn't fully expected: community gossip. An anonymous post on the neighborhood forum mentioned the odd situation at the Thompson house. "Heard the daughter bought the house back? Wonder what that's about." The post lit a slow fire. Questions. Opinions. Coffee shop whispers. People who'd once dismissed my family as enviable now asked the wrong questions at block club meetings. Someone commented that the old money feel of the house was fading.
That was satisfying.
That was overdue. There was also a practical advantage to owning the house. I controlled access. No more midnight guests who'd overstay and leave beer cans in the yard. No more late-night calls demanding favors. If someone rang the bell, no matter who they were, screened. I started taking calls at the gate, politely but firmly setting boundaries. My parents were frustrated at first. "She's being difficult." But then, after a month, they started appreciating not having strangers in the living room. And my father, oh, my father, the man who once shrugged at my needs, began to change in small ways. Not in grand apologies, but in tiny, tentative questions. "How is the business going?" he'd ask. "Do you need anything?" He still flinched when I talked about the past, tried to smooth things over with jokes that no longer landed. But the silence that had once been a weapon in Evelyn's hands now started to feel like regret in his chest. Evelyn, by contrast, was a force that didn't weather well. As the months progressed, the public facade she'd so carefully curated started to crack. Her hair never quite sat right. The dresses that had once flowed with confidence seemed stiff now, like paper costumes. She tried to reassert herself in other ways: calling charity committees, attending garden club events, hosting an oversized blessing luncheon for Mia's supposed academic achievements. But people whispered, and she felt it: "You can't bully your way into respect forever." She got angry in passive-aggressive ways. One morning, she removed an heirloom vase from the mantel and placed it on a high shelf for safety, as though I wasn't cautious enough. She rearranged family photos to hide mine. She spread rumors about my business, small hints that the company wasn't as solid as I suggested. I let the rumors float. Time and contracts handled the rest. When a client once asked, "Is Claire's firm stable?" I sent a calm, professional portfolio and let the work speak. But revenge isn't only external. There was an inner architecture I needed to build too. Owning the house didn't fix the nights when doubt crept in, the days when the past played back like a film I couldn't turn off. At night, I wrote in a leather journal I'd bought with my first real profit, notes on leadership, plans for expansion, letters I never sent. I saw a therapist twice a month, someone to help me unravel the knots of resentment so I could repurpose them into something healthier. There were days when grief came in waves, and I let it. Healing was not a straight line. As the year rolled on, my business grew enough that I could finally hire a property manager to handle the day-to-day of the house. That was a crucial, liberating move. No longer did I have to be the enforcer of every little rule. I could step back, take a breath, focus on strategy. The manager, a pragmatic woman named Lila, was a godsend, sharp, discreet, and no-nonsense. She sent polite but firm reminders when rent was late. She arranged repairs without drama. And when Evelyn tried to undermine her authority, "We don't remember agreeing to that," Lila replied with a professional email that left no room for argument. I liked Lila immediately. She was someone who made the system work without spectacle. It was Lila who suggested we open the house to community tours for a local Heritage Day. The idea came from her experience dealing with local historical societies. Show the house, demonstrate care, and the image shifts. I mulled it over. "Are you serious?" my father asked aghast. "The media? Neighbors? Exposure?" "Yes," I said. "People should see this place cared for properly. Not because we were wealthy, but because we deserve dignity." And so we did. On the day of the tour, I stood by the front door greeting visitors, neighbors, a local lifestyle blogger, a couple from the garden club. People complimented the restored wainscoting, the newly planted rosebush, the clean, airy rooms. They took photos. They said, "What a lovely place. What a relief to see it maintained." I watched Mia hover in the background, her usual smugness gone. There were no paparazzi, no dramatic reveals, just ordinary praise. But to Mia, that ordinary praise stung. She had always taken public adoration for granted. Now she had to watch people admire what I had preserved. The final part of my plan wasn't just to keep them under my roof with rules and rent. It was to make sure the community learned the truth, subtly, legally, unambiguously. I started with the basics. I invited a few neighbors and the bank manager to a small, thank you coffee at the house. I explained renovations I'd paid for, the charity contributions I'd made on behalf of the household, the legal transfers. The bank manager, an old acquaintance, nodded and said, "It's actually impressive to see someone step up and handle the finances so responsibly." His voice carried weight. The neighborhood listened. Word travels in a small town. People started seeing me differently. Where once I had been the quiet background, I was now a competent, visible force. Invitations to speak at the local business association trickled in. I accepted one cautiously, then another. Public acknowledgement has a funny effect. It makes private mockery look petty. There were consequences, of course. Evelyn lashed out publicly once, at a members-only charity event, calling me opportunistic in a whisper loud enough for her circle to hear. I smiled and gave a speech about community and resilience. People clapped. Her whisper floated back to me like a tiny, impotent bird. The tiny pleasures of watching entitlement recalibrate were real. Watching Mia try to schmooze with former admirers and fail because she lacked substance, because her charm was show, not work, was satisfying in ways I hadn't expected. But I kept myself grounded. I refused to gloat publicly. Subtlety was part of the strategy. Let their assumptions implode quietly while my life continued to expand. There was one moment, months later, that summed up everything. A block party on a warm afternoon. Music, kids with ice cream, laughter. I walked down the street, not because I needed to be seen, but because I wanted to be part of something ordinary. As I approached the small crowd in front of the Thompson house, I saw Mia there, flustered, defending a point she didn't believe in. Someone in the crowd, Mrs. Alvarez from next door, caught my eye, smiled, and waved me over. She hugged me and said, unprompted, "We're proud of you, Claire. Thank you for fixing up the place. It means a lot to the street." I felt something like relief. I felt the warmth of a community's acceptance. But even as things settled, Evelyn never stopped trying to claw back control in petty ways, moving my grandmother's old rocking chair to the garage for storage, signing up for council meetings, and speaking over me when she disagreed. When she did, I would respond with calm, legal clarity. Per the property agreement, all communal decisions go through the property manager, and Lila would step in with a professional tone that shut her down. The beauty of structure is that it protects you from tantrums. By the time the first anniversary of that canceled birthday rolled around, my life looked very different. I had a team, a growing business, a home I'd restored, and a family who lived under my roof, but answered to rules I'd set. I still had nights of doubt. I still had moments when memories cut deep. But the ledger had been rewritten. And yet, revenge was not only about scales and rules. At some point, I realized it was also about reframing the family story. So I did something small, personal, and meaningful. I wrote a letter to my parents, not accusatory, not theatrical, just honest. I slid it under their door. In it I wrote about the years I'd kept my payments secret, about the nights I'd worked so they didn't worry, about the sting of being invisible. I wrote about the pride I felt being able to provide once, then the sorrow at having to make a hard choice to reclaim my dignity. I didn't expect an apology or a tearful reconciliation. I expected maybe silence, maybe anger. What I got was a note the next morning, written in my mother's shaking hand. Claire, it read, I am sorry. I cannot undo the past. You are brave, more brave than I ever knew. Please forgive me for not seeing you sooner. Whether it was genuine or a reaction to public sentiment, I couldn't be sure. Forgiveness is a complicated currency. But I tucked the note into my journal and let it sit there, a fragile thing. Still, the work wasn't over. There were practical issues to manage: taxes, maintenance, fair arbitration when disputes arose. I hired a lawyer for property matters, sensible and calm, and we updated the legal protections so that the house and its funds couldn't be threatened again by impulsive decisions. I wanted the safety I had once created for them, except this time, it was built on systems and not on silent sacrifice. And then, one late autumn evening, when the leaves had turned and the light in the windows took on a golden hush, Mia approached me quietly in the kitchen. No fanfare this time, no group of friends, no dramatic gestures, just her, vulnerable and small. Claire, she said, voice low. Can I talk to you? I nodded. She fidgeted with a dish towel, eyes avoiding mine. I'm sorry, she said suddenly, the words tumbling out. I never realized. I thought everything would always be easy. I didn't see the work behind it. I took things for granted and she stopped, unable to finish. I felt something soften in me. Not forgiveness exactly, but a small easing. You can start by doing your share, I said. Help with the bills, the house, and actually be present. That would be a start. She swallowed hard and nodded. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't a movie montage of reconciliation. It was two people learning to live together under rules that were fair and enforced. For me, that was enough for now. There were critics, of course. Some neighbors whispered that I'd been harsh, that I'd been cruel to make my parents pay rent. Others said I'd reclaimed my dignity and done what anyone should do when they've been taken advantage of. Either way, I knew my life had shifted into a place where I was the author of my fate. The ledger was balanced again. That winter, as snow dusted the garden and the house glowed with lamplight, I brewed tea and sat on the porch. The rocking chair was back in the living room, placed where my grandmother used to sit. My parents were inside, talking softly. For a long time, I watched the subtle scene of a family learning to breathe without inherited assumptions suffocating them. Revenge had not been about cruelty so much as recalibration. It had been a lesson taught to myself and to them. Dignity isn't a favor you grant, it's something you take by refusing to be diminished. I had won, and I knew how to hold victory without letting it become me. The business was growing. The house was stable. The small daily reins of respect had been rewired. Mia scrubbed the oven when asked. Dad mended the fence. Mom brought pies and practiced gratitude with tentative sincerity. And somewhere in the quiet between one breath and the next, I felt that old ache ease. The night of the gala arrived faster than I expected. I had tried to prepare myself for it all week, choosing the right outfit, rehearsing my remarks in the mirror, studying my breathing whenever I thought about the audience. But still, when I stood outside the venue, clutching my invitation, my stomach twisted with nerves. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers and golden light. Round tables draped in crisp white cloths filled the room, silverware gleaming, glasses already half filled with wine. People laughed in clusters, their voices rising above the string quartet that played in the corner. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I entered, and I felt the familiar prickling sensation of eyes on me. I wasn't invisible anymore. Evelyn spotted me almost immediately. She was dressed to kill, her gown a shade of emerald that clung to her figure, her hair swept up into a style that probably took hours. Her smile was tight as she approached. You made it, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Of course I did, I answered calmly. I wouldn't miss it. Her eyes flicked over my outfit, simple but elegant. A black cocktail dress I had chosen for its understatement. I could see the calculation in her gaze, the quick assessment of whether I looked good enough to threaten her spotlight. Mia trailed behind, phone in hand, taking selfies near the floral arrangements. She barely glanced at me before rolling her eyes and whispering something to a friend. I caught the word pretend float through the air.
I didn't react. Not yet.
The speeches began after dinner. Donors, city officials, a few business owners took the stage. I clapped politely, sipping water to steady my nerves. Then, to my surprise, the host called my name. I froze for a moment. I hadn't expected to be asked to speak. Evelyn's head whipped toward me, her expression startled. Mia's mouth dropped open, but the crowd was waiting. I rose, legs trembling slightly, and walked to the podium. The microphone hummed softly as I adjusted it. For a second, my mind went blank. Then I took a deep breath and began. I wasn't sure what to say tonight, I admitted honestly, scanning the faces before me. I'm not a politician. I'm not a celebrity. I'm just someone who grew up believing that my voice didn't matter as much as others. That my dreams were optional. The room grew quieter. Forks stilled, glasses paused midair. Even Evelyn tilted forward slightly, curious despite herself. But life has a way of teaching you lessons, I continued. And the biggest one I've learned is that silence is dangerous. If you don't tell your own story, someone else will write it for you, and they'll usually get it wrong. I caught Mia's scowl from across the room. Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line. But I wasn't speaking to them anymore. I was speaking to everyone who had ever felt dismissed, underestimated, written off before they had a chance to prove themselves. I told them about starting over, about building something out of nothing, about the nights I worked until dawn while others slept. I didn't brag about numbers, but I painted the picture of resilience, of risk, of determination. Success, I said, isn't measured by titles or applause. It's measured by persistence. By the quiet moments when you refuse to give up, even when everyone around you thinks you already lost. A hush fell over the crowd. For the first time in years, I felt their attention, not pitying, not condescending, but genuine. I let the silence hang for a moment before finishing softly. I'm standing here tonight not because I'm extraordinary, but because I stopped letting other people define me. And I hope, if nothing else, you walk away tonight believing you have the right to define yourselves, too. The applause began slowly, then built. Warm, steady, real. I stepped back from the microphone, heart pounding, and returned to my seat. Evelyn's face was unreadable. Mia looked like she'd bitten into something sour. My father stared at me, his expression caught between pride and something more complicated. I didn't need their validation anymore. For the first time, I knew I could stand on my own. As I sat down after my speech, I could feel the ripple it had left in the room. Conversations buzzed, but the tone had shifted, lighter, warmer. A few people leaned in closer to their tablemates, nodding toward me. Others whispered with raised eyebrows, clearly surprised by what they had just heard. I lifted my glass of water, pretending to sip, though really I just needed a moment to steady the rush of adrenaline. And that's when I felt Evelyn's hand on my arm. "You spoke well," she said through clenched teeth, her smile fixed but strained. "Thank you," I replied, meeting her eyes evenly. She gave a tight laugh. "Though, I think you made it sound more dramatic than it really was. People don't need sob stories, they need results." Her words stung for a split second, but I realized something then. She was rattled. Evelyn, the woman who always had the upper hand, was on edge. She wasn't used to me drawing attention, at least not in a way that made people admire me. Mia chimed in, her phone still in hand. "Honestly, it was kind of boring. Nobody cares about persistent speeches. You should have at least added a joke or something." I turned to her, my voice calm. "Maybe you'll understand persistence when you've had to practice it." Her cheeks flushed red, and she looked away. Later, as the evening wound down, a man in a sharp navy suit approached me. He introduced himself as Daniel Brooks, one of the major donors for the event. His handshake was firm, his eyes curious. "I just wanted to say," he began, "your words tonight, they hit home. You didn't just recite a polished statement. You spoke from experience. That takes guts. Thank you, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled faintly. I'd like to hear more about your work sometime. Here's my card. As he handed it to me, I caught Evelyn watching from across the room, her jaw tight. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, calculating, wondering how she had lost her grip on the spotlight. For once, the attention wasn't on her flawless dress or her carefully rehearsed anecdotes.
It was on me.
When we returned home that night, the air in the car was tense. My father drove silently, eyes fixed on the road, while Evelyn sat beside him with a smile stretched so thin it could have snapped. I was in the back seat, staring out the window, my heart still thundering with adrenaline. Finally, Evelyn broke the silence. You know, it's dangerous to build people's expectations up like that. What happens if you can't deliver? What happens when they realize you're just... She stopped herself, but the venom in her tone filled in the blanks. Just what? I asked softly. She turned, her eyes flashing in the dim light. Just someone who doesn't belong in those circles. I met her gaze evenly. Funny, that room seemed to think otherwise. Mia groaned dramatically. Can you two not?
It's exhausting. This whole night was exhausting.
And for what? Some speech no one will remember next week. I didn't reply.
I didn't need to.
I knew what I'd seen in those people's eyes. Recognition, respect. That couldn't be erased by Evelyn's bitterness or Mia's dismissiveness. Later, lying in bed, I thought back over everything. The way Evelyn tried to downplay me. The way Mia sneered. The way my father stayed silent, caught between two worlds he never managed to balance. For years, I had let them convince me I was less. That my contributions didn't matter, that my worth was conditional on their approval. But tonight had proved otherwise. They hadn't expected me to stand tall, to speak with conviction, to command the room. They hadn't expected someone they'd treated like a shadow to step into the light. And the best part? This was only the beginning. I turned over, pulling the blanket tighter around me. Tomorrow, I would begin quietly putting things in place, setting boundaries, claiming what was mine, building something so unshakable that no amount of Evelyn's manipulation or Mia's entitlement could touch it. Because if they thought tonight unsettled them, they hadn't seen anything yet. The months after the gala felt like a slow unspooling of something that had been tightly wounded for years. My days filled with work and meetings, house affairs and property management, and the small, steady domestic rituals of living with people who once thought themselves entitled to everything. The ledger of our family life had been rearranged, and now it needed upkeep, deliberate, patient, sometimes boring work that no one wanted to do but which, in the end, held everything together. I kept building outward. More clients, a slightly larger team, deeper contracts. The company took on a few local shops, then a small regional practice. I traveled sometimes for work, train rides and occasional flights, and returned with new ideas for the house and new confidence in the way I spoke in meeting rooms. People who met me at conferences or lunches didn't see the past. They saw a professional who was focused and fair-minded. That perception was part strategy and part honest living. I simply stopped apologizing for being who I was. Back at home, the dynamics continued to shift. Dad, whose silence had once been a kind of consent to Evelyn's little humiliations, began asking questions about my business, as if he wanted to understand, not to judge. He asked technical questions once that made me laugh. How does that profit come in again? Is it monthly revenue or one-off? Small things. But each time the conversation moved away from his old posture of withdrawal felt like progress. Evelyn, on the other hand, learned to wage a different war, subtler and more poisonous. She tried to undermine my authority by inviting old friends, women who had once praised her at teas, and whispering versions of our story that painted me as tricky, opportunistic, ungrateful. She left passive-aggressive notes about proper housekeeping and family respect. At one point, she called a neighborhood council meeting to complain about the odd arrangement at our address and suggested we were bending the moral fabric of the block. I answered the council's polite questions with transparency. My property manager, Lila, sent a tidy packet of documents about the legal status of the house and the renovations funded by my company. I attended the council, gave a brief statement about preservation and community, and then stepped aside. The room responded favorably. They appreciated the restoration work, the way I had kept the house's architectural heart intact. Evelyn's complaints sounded increasingly like sour notes. There were real consequences to how I'd structured things. Owning the house had given me not only leverage but a platform. When the bank realized I'd assumed ownership in order to stop the auction and then offered relocation help, they had been polite but firm in their paperwork. I had done everything by the letter. Auditable, legal, and final. No one could call it petty theft or vengeful behavior when every signature and payment trail was clean. That mattered. It neutralized the drama and replaced it with the more humiliating recognition that I had been the reliable adult all along. One of the turning points came unexpectedly. A local community center director named Rosa called me one afternoon, her voice warm and direct. "We've noticed what you've done with the house and how you've helped small businesses. Would you consider partnering with us to create a small fund? Something to help families struggling with mortgage payments or emergency housing."
She paused.
"We need leadership like yours." I thought of the pink foreclosure notices that once littered my parents' table. I thought of motel rooms and the humiliation in my mother's voice. I thought of Mia's sobbing plea at midnight. And then I thought, what would serve the people of this neighborhood more, yet another personal victory or a broader, systemic correction that actually helped other families? I told Rosa I'd like to help. Not simply because it looked good, but because it felt right. Over the next 6 months, I worked quietly with Rosa and Lila to set up a small community resilience fund, seeded modestly by me, supplemented by a handful of local donors I'd met at the gala, including Daniel Brooks, who became surprisingly pragmatic and generous once he understood the proposal. The fund offered short-term mortgage relief, emergency grants, and financial coaching. I insisted on transparency, a rotating advisory panel, and strict rules so it could never be politicized. The fund's charter was public. Its accounts were audited quarterly. When we launched it with a small ceremony on the lawn, roses in bloom, neighbors gathered, coffee and croissants being passed around, Evelyn stood on the sidelines, hands clasped, unable to find the words. The headline in the local paper read, "Local Entrepreneur Launches Fund to Help Families Stay in Their Homes." It was the headline every person with a conscience wanted to see. And it was, for me, a quiet, deliberate act of reclaiming not just my story but the story of what a family or a neighborhood should do for itself. That doesn't mean the fallout vanished. Mia's resentment simmered. Evelyn grew more erratic. One evening she removed a framed photograph of my mother from the mantel and boxed it for safekeeping, which was code for control. I learned to respond without fuel. I called Lila. "Record, photograph, file," I said. "Everything is documented." Lila handled it with professional detachment. We returned the photograph publicly, clean and polished, with a note in the house ledger that it was restored for historical accuracy. That made it a community artifact, not Evelyn's private trophy. The more structural my responses became, the less ammunition Evelyn had. Her outbursts started to look small next to the actual institutions we were building: a management office, a maintenance fund, the Community Resilience Fund. While she spun in place, I built outward. In this season, my relationship with my parents shifted too. They were awkward at first. Thank yous were framed in anxious hedging. "Thank you for the rent forgiveness last month," Mom would say, as if gratitude needed permission. Dad, honest and slow, began calling on Sundays to ask about my life in a new voice, curious rather than defensive. Those phone calls became the place where, finally, we began to converse like adults. Mia oscillated between fury and imitation. She went on dates, briefly, with men who were charmed by her looks but puzzled by her entitlement. She applied to a scholarship unassisted and later sent a short, awkward email thanking me for encouraging her. That email I archived. I didn't reply right away. When I finally did, I wrote, "You're welcome. Use it well." And then came the evening that would, in small ways, mark the close of that particular chapter. I had organized a modest neighborhood appreciation night at the house, this time truly informal. Soup, bread, an open fireplace, and people who'd benefited from the Resilience Fund speaking for a few minutes. I asked a woman named Patrice, whose family had nearly lost their home last winter, to say a few words. She stood before our little group, hands clasped, voice steady. "If you hadn't stepped in," she said, looking at me and then at the assembled neighbors, "we would be without a place this winter. We had nowhere left to go. This fund, this community, kept our kids warm." There were no flashing cameras, no viral headlines, just small voices and a chorus of nods. After the evening wound down, my parents lingered by the porch light. Dad's eyes were wet, and Mom's hands trembled as she warmed them on her mug. "I don't know how to say it," Dad murmured, "but I'm grateful. Truly. I can't undo the past, Claire. I can only," he broke off. The words were raw. My father was someone who struggled to speak his heart, and now, finally, the dam was opening. I moved closer and sat beside him. "I never wanted to punish you," I said in a low voice. I paused, searching for the right phrase. I wanted respect. I wanted to see the people I love show up with honesty. This work we're doing, that's better than revenge." Mom touched my arm. She looked older than her years in that moment, humility written across her face. "We were blind," she said simply. "We are sorry." That one evening was an inflection point. Not a total cleanse. Old habits die slowly, but a new baseline. Honesty, conversations, and a plan. For the first time, I felt a real willingness from them to repair what had been broken. And yet, because stories crave drama, Evelyn could not be entirely tamed by community service and restoration. She had one last attempt. It came in the form of a small, spiteful legal maneuver. She claimed that certain antique furniture, family heirlooms, had been moved without her consent, and that this constituted an illegal removal of household assets. The claim was petty, the kind of thing an indignant person files when they feel cornered. It required a response, official receipts, provenance documentation, photographs. There were lawyers, a day in a small hearing room, and more paperwork than I'd expected. I sat across from her lawyer with my file neatly organized. Lila sat beside me. My attorney, calm and exacting, presented the documented chain of custody for each item. Evelyn's complaint unraveled under the weight of proof. The judge dismissed it with a brief reprimand about wasting the court's time. When we left the courthouse, the air tasted strangely sweet. Evelyn was crimson with humiliation, and yet she carried on with an odd cheer, as if contempt could replace dignity. That night, I let myself breathe deeply, for the first time in months. The legal fuss was the final, small echo of her attempts to exert control. After that, her energy dissipated into quieter forms of discontent, gossip, isolation, the small acts of trying to assert herself at bridge club. Months stretched into a full year since that canceled birthday. A year of work, restoration, community building, and internal repair. I had learned how to turn anger into structure and humiliation into architecture. I had taught myself how to negotiate with the bank, to hire staff, to set rules in a house where the people who lived beneath its roof were the same ones who had once dismissed me. It was complicated and often ugly, and sometimes heartbreaking. And I had survived it not by spectacle, but by slow, steady competence. In the quiet moments, I wrote down what I wanted the house to be, a place where children could grow up with integrity, where neighbors looked out for one another, where people who made mistakes could meet consequences and learn. I included the clause that would prevent impulsive family decisions from spiriting the house away again. I included the community fund's bylaws to ensure the resources were used with care. I included an open book policy for the property so no single voice could dictate everything anymore. The final scene came unexpectedly at a small family dinner after one of the Resilience Fund's meetings. We were all at the table, Dad, Mom, Mia, Evelyn, and me. The table setting was non-fussy, just warm light and good bread. Mom had baked something, smiling awkwardly as she set the plates. Mia's shirt was plain. She'd taken a job at the local coffee shop. Her eyes were tired but steady. Evelyn sat opposite, hands folded, attempting a smile. Dad cleared his throat. I want to say an official thank you, he began, voice unsteady. Claire, you did something for this street for us. I am sorry I didn't see it sooner. I failed to protect my children in the ways that mattered. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd heard from him. It wasn't cinematic, no bawling, no sweeping gestures, just simple, human words shaped by years of habit finally broken. Evelyn spoke then, quieter than anyone had heard her in years. I was wrong. I thought I was helping Mia. I forgot how to be fair. I am sorry. The words came out narrow and small, but they were words. I could have risen and delivered a speech of triumph. I could have made them sit in shame. But I realized that revenge had already done its work. The ledger had been adjusted. People had seen the truth. I wanted more than to humiliate them. I wanted to build a life that left room for learning, however unlikely. Thank you, I said simply. I don't want to erase what happened. We all carry scars. But I would rather we do something with them, learn, change, and be better. Mia looked at me then, eyes bright with a mixture of remorse and fear. Claire, she whispered, I don't know how to fix it, but I want to try. We weren't healed. We weren't a Hollywood happy family. But we were, for the first time, deliberately trying not to be what we had been. We finished the meal in a quieter, steadier way. Later, on the porch, I watched Dad and Mom walk slowly down the path together, leaning into one another with a care that looked almost new. I inhaled the cold night air and felt the old rage settle into something like acceptance. As I closed the house that night, the same house I'd bought to stop the auction, I thought about the shape of revenge. It had never been the shocking, viral moment I'd fantasized about as a teenager. Instead, it had been patient, boring, and legal, administered through ledgers and contracts, by holding people to standards and offering structures for repair. It had been about teaching a lesson with systems, not spectacle. If you'd asked me back at the bakery, blowing out those candles on the cheap paper plates, whether I'd buy the house and create a community fund and stare down 1,000 pettier storms, well, I probably would have laughed. But people change. Goals shift. What felt like retribution belonged to a younger, angrier version of me. The adult thing, the hard, honest thing, was to build an alternative to the cycle I'd known. So, here's the truth in the end. I did cancel their mortgage. I did buy the house out from under a system that had once taken advantage of me. I made them pay rent, yes. I made them live with the consequences of their inattention and favoritism. And then I offered a route back, not as owners, but as tenants who had to be accountable. I offered them dignity only if they were willing to accept responsibility for it. That, I decided, was fair. There were sacrifices. There were nights when I thought I'd been cruel. There were moments I missed simpler bonds with my family and wondered if I'd hardened too much. But over time I started to see other things grow. The neighbor who could pay her heating bill because of the community fund, the child who could stay in her school because we helped cover a delinquent mortgage for a month, a woman who learned to budget and changed the course of her family. Those were the wins that mattered. On a late spring morning, a year after the canceled birthday, I walked down the lane and met Mrs. Alvarez by the mailbox. You did good, she said in that plain way people in small towns say something that means everything. Thanks, I said. We're trying. She squeezed my hand. That's enough. That's when I realized revenge had been only an opening act. The real work, harder and infinitely more satisfying, was stewardship. If this story hit home for you, if you've ever been pushed aside, underestimated, or asked to sacrifice without reciprocity, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I want to hear your stories. Did I go too far? Did I do right by my family? Would you have handled it differently? If this resonated, subscribe for more real-life stories where the underdog flips the script, not always with fireworks, but with grit, long-term strategy, and sometimes quiet mercy. Thanks for listening.